Before you go on stage, you take 15 minutes before. I literally stand there, I read the energy of the room, and I visualize dropping out of my head into my heart so that I can speak from my heart and I can make it about them. Then I cannot be nervous because it's not about me.
Tell us a little bit about your first few engagements. How'd you get them? Were you approached, or were you seeking them? And how did you learn how to ask for the pay that you wanted?
It always goes back to the same thing. It's like, what do you want to talk about and what are you really passionate about? What do you know? There's a lot of speaking training out there, and a lot of it is frankly not very good. I think the one time where I had audiences walk out is when I followed somebody else's formula, and this particular person said, you got to structure the talk like this, like this, like this, like this, like this, and you follow that. And I did, and I was so uncomfortable, and it was so out of the ordinary for me that people literally got up and walked out. That was the worst talk I've ever given, and it was at NASDAQ, no less. I mean, it was a disaster. But what I have learned is like when you think about going out, you want to go into where you're passionate and what actually interests you. I've spoken at Merck Pharmaceuticals, I've spoken at Johnson and Johnson, and I'm not a pharmaceutical expert. But what I'm an expert at is to, really motivate people and to look at teams from this creative aspect that I understand. Because I, better than anybody, because I had all these crazy creatives that were coming together for a short period of time that had to produce in what days something that would then last for another 6 months or a year. So the pressure was on. Because I have that experience, I was able to channel that experience into look at team building from a different perspective. Not just like, here's the job, how do we get the job done, but how would somebody like that approach that? So that was my differentiation factor. So you must look at the pieces that you typically apologize for. And what I could have done is I could have said, well, I'm not really coming from the professional speaking. I'm really coming from the creative arts. So I should really be speaking about things that people commonly assume. But I didn't. I said, I'm taking the concepts that I've learned in the creative industry that allow me to work for companies like Wrangler, Mercedes-Benz, Levi Strauss. And I'm going to bring the concepts on how to take the most non-conforming creative people in the world in a few days under one umbrella to produce something. I'm going to show you how to do that. Would you like to know that? Now I've taken this whole idea. I see you're smiling, and I just gave it the punchline. So add to your piece, because I think you have a different perspective, an additional perspective as a speaker agent on what would you say to your audience now.
This is brilliant, and you figured this out pretty much, I'm sure, on your own and through trial and error. And really, it takes you getting out of the way, right? You and all the coaches you followed along the way, out of the way, and listening really to what they need and how you're going to move the needle for them. Whether you have 45 minutes, an hour, a 3-day conference workshop, whatever it might be, if you move the dial in the room, you're going to be called back. And the only way that you can move that dial is to think more about them than you're thinking about yourself. And you figured that out. I mean, that's just really, really brilliant.
You know what? That's the biggest advice I always give everybody when people say, "Oh my gosh, I could never do what you do. I'm too nervous." And I always say the same thing. The trick to not being nervous is very simple. Before you go on stage, you take 15 minutes before. I literally stand there, I read the energy of the room, and I meditate on this. I pray to find the right words for this particular audience. And I visualize dropping out of my head into my heart.
Wow.
So that I can speak from my heart and I can make it about them. Then I cannot be nervous because it's not about me. If I have that visualization, on how do I get out of my head into my heart to serve them, you can't be nervous.